Thank you.
Good evening, dear friends. On behalf of Vivekananda Vedanta Society of Chicago, we are delighted today to welcome Ramu Ramachandran to present his insights on the harmony of religions through architecture. By profession, Ramu is a well-established architect based in Chicago. For over 25 years, he worked on architectural projects involving senior living, education, colleges, and universities. He began learning architecture from his grandfather, who was also an architect, and with devotion served the Vivekananda College and Ramakrishna Mutt in Chennai, India. Today, at the Home of Harmony, Ramu will present as a case study the role of architecture in the harmony of religions. There will be time for questions, so have your questions ready. And on that note, let's welcome Ramu Ramachandran to begin his presentation.
Good evening, everybody. Very happy to see everybody. Thank you for taking your time to spend your time in the company of fellow seekers and enjoy the evening. I'd like to start with a small prayer. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Hari Om. So it's a very interesting topic today. I would like to extend my pranams to Pujya Swamiji Maharaj for coming up with this topic and to spend some time together in discussions. You might disagree with a few things that I might say, but please know that if I make any errors in the interpretation of the great work of Swamiji, those errors are mine. And it is very difficult to, as you know, drink an ocean by being a human being. Such was the work of Swami Vivekananda. With that said, I would like to proceed with the talk. The topic for the evening is harmony of religions, but as seen through the lens and perspective of works of architecture. In other words, is it possible that architecture help or be able to assist in the work of spreading harmony among religions? So, the question is, we have some examples to learn from. So that's what we are going to do today. With that said, let me see if I can just point it towards the... I'm just going to make sure that the clicker works. Let's see, maybe it has to be turned on, perhaps. I'll start, we're going to get the clicker to work, it'll take a moment. But I will start by saying, I would like to extend, a thanks, a heartfelt thanks and gratitude to Swamiji, great Swamiji Vivekananda, for the compassion that he took upon us to interpret the words and lessons of his master and give it physical form. We do not have too many examples of this. This is a spiritual soul who took it upon himself to take the message of unity of religions and to extend it and to give it form in the early 1900s. So, I would like to start by asking ourselves, what is harmony? What do we mean? What do we talk about? So, I would like to maybe break the talk into 4 parts. We will look at harmony of religions through the lens of architecture and symbolism, architectural symbolism. We will also look at Swami's travels, the 1893 fair, all the different examples of architecture that he looked at around the world and in India, and his approach, and how he learned from it, and how he, extended it to a physical manifestation of a temple. So we will also get at that point into looking at some examples, comparative examples of architecture, and then we will extend that finally to learning from Belur Mutt and the architecture of Belur Mutt. Harmony. In Indian logical thought, sometimes words are described with a definition, and sometimes words are meaning is described by explaining what things are not. So what is harmony? I would say it would be the absence of discord and the absence of division, and also then a sense of unity. Now, a few words from Swamiji Vivekananda. He spoke of universal acceptance in his opening speech in 1893 in Chicago, and he spoke of assimilation and not destruction in his closing address at the World's Parliament. And this very temple, in this very home of harmony, at the entrance, we see a representation of the words, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. The truth is one. Prophets, there is a typo, pardon me, call it by different names. Such is the same for architecture. There is architecture from around the world based on geography, materials, climate, and religious symbolism. And it is interesting in that at the end of the day, the goal for everybody is the same, but the symbolism is so different. There are great masters that we have seen over the years. Some, we look at their lives as our example in a Vedantic sense. For some, it is their written word. And for the many for whom the written word even is out of reach, there are symbols very powerful symbols of every religion. People wear it on their lockets, they wear it on their rings, they have it in their shrines at home, and just the presence of a symbol for many is a sign of welcome, a sign of identification, a sign of blessing. It becomes extremely important in the visual field to respect the symbols. We see here Taoism, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Swamiji in his travels had deeply imbibed the symbolism in religion and made it a point to represent it in the temple at Belur Mutt. So I would go back for a second to the term assimilation and not destruction. Interestingly, in architecture, there is the great architects can create in a few ways. Like a sculptor, you could choose to chisel away from a piece of stone. And you could discover or express the form hidden within, or you could assimilate. Belur Mutt is a very interesting example, in my humble opinion, of the assimilative principle or the additive principle of architecture. We're going to go through a few examples from Swami's travels and from lessons in architecture from around the world. So, for those in Islam, it is very important that you would notice in a lot of the great mosques, the great arches, the framed entrances. This is a very important aspect of Islamic architecture. This one on the left is from Fatehpur Sikri, just north of Delhi. And the great arch is a sign of the grandeur of the structure. It is a sign of welcome. It is very beautifully carved. There are numerous geometries of arches around the world. The Indian arch, the Islamic arch, the Gothic arch, all have very different geometries in how they're expressed. This is an Islamic arch. When we go to Belur Mutt, suddenly I hope all these references are going to jump back to your eyes when you start noticing the pieces of the puzzle that Swamiji brought together to represent the entrance to the great temple, Belur Mutt. To the right is a very famous mosque, the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. Also a dome, but you can see how important it is that the different architects, the different religions express the radius and the geometry of the dome in so many different ways. But the dome is, as a structure, originated, heavily borrowed from, developed in Islamic architecture. A lot of the Hindu temples would have shikharas, gopuras and such, but very few domes. So definitely a reference to Islamic architecture. The windows, the proportions of the windows in Islamic architecture are very refined and very beautiful. Hindu temples, there are so many examples of Hindu temple architecture. They're very different in the different parts of India. But one very interesting aspect of the Hindu temple is you could see in the southern temples a gopura. We will spend a moment on that. But that grand, beautiful spire that you notice, which is above the Garbha Mandira, its grandeur is very differently represented when you walk into the temple. It is actually very difficult to approach the Garbha Mandira. You have to walk through 4 different spaces, and at the very end, it is a very narrow neck. You have to enter the doorways to the Garbha Mandira. Actually, not everybody is allowed to enter the Garbha Mandira, but it is probably the narrowest and smallest aspect of a Hindu temple, and oftentimes illuminated with a few lamps, and it is beautiful. You know, for me, it represents the light in the cave of your heart. It is extremely beautiful. It is very divine. It makes you filled with love and wonder and devotion. But when it comes to access and openness, Swamiji's vision drew from architecture in India, but really very greatly differed from it. Because he said the Garbha Mandira needs to be accessible. So you will see that represented in Belur Math, where he took away the divisions and the barriers, and he placed the statue of Thakur, where it was very easily visible and accessible to the whole hall. This is the Madurai Meenakshi temple, very highly decorated. The temple in the South Indian architecture, the Gopura, the announcement of the temple to the town and to the villagers and the dwellers, the townspeople. The Gopura was the most important symbol of the temple, not the Vimana that is in the middle of this picture, probably halfway between the two Gopurams. The Garbha Mandira is under the Vimana, which is actually in scale much simpler. The entrance is really exhibited. Swamiji, in his instructions to Swami Vijnanananda, and we will spend a few more minutes on that, was very, very clear in what he wanted to borrow from and how he wanted it borrowed. This is an example of a beautiful cathedral in Florence, often simply referred to as the Florence Cathedral. You can compare this to the proportions of the dome in the Blue Mosque. Is much more elongated vertically. You can see those ropes or the ribs of the dome, structural necessity. They hold the dome down, and when you go back finally and look at Belur Math and the domes, and we see the images, you might catch a similarity of the proportion of the dome more to something like this cathedral than to many other forms of domes from around. I just wanted to take a moment to share this section, not to put anybody to sleep, but it is incredibly complicated to build a structure such as Belur Math. It is actually very demanding from an architectural engineering perspective. It is amazing that such a structure was built at such a time with such a level of attention to detail and quality. There is a tremendous amount of load that the dome puts on the structure below it. And many times in Islamic architecture and other architectures around the world, you will not see the simplicity of this style of the dome. I'm going back. The dome rests on a base, and the base is beautiful, but it's a very simple base that lands right on the structure and of the building itself. But Swamiji had borrowed heavily from Indian architecture, and you will see a Navaratna dome arrangement, which we will see in a moment, where the stress that the dome puts at the base of the structure is actually offset by a series of smaller domes around the main dome that support the main dome. Swamiji, in his travels through India and his great love for all the great teachers in India and around the world, also heavily drew from Buddhist architecture, from the entrance Torana to the hall inside Belur Math. This was the caves at Ajanta Ellora. This was the grand hall. You might notice quite some similarities to the grand hall at Belur Math, with Thakur's image at the far end and the colonnade. These are some beautiful examples of the stonework from Rajasthan. These are beautifully decorated window elements, balconies called jarokas. There is a sun shading element, which is the arched sunshade. And you see these small windows, and you see jalis on either side of the window. Jalis are openings that help shield from the sun, but in their structure and design allow a certain amount of cooling from the way the air moves through the jalis. So this is Rajasthan. This is Swamiji in his travels through India, kept copious notes of all the architecture he was seeing. And it was obviously he had a plan in his mind. Not that he would, frighten everybody with his plans, but at the right time he passed it on to the right person to execute. Not everybody was even capable of understanding Swamiji's instructions, but his brother, disciple, Swami Vivekananda, was the one to whom he entrusted the task of developing the design with the architects and engineers. And finally, a beautiful example of a temple in Bengal, the Bishnupur temple. This is an example of a Bengal arch. It is a brick arch, but it's a very beautiful representation of traditional architecture. Heavy sloped roofs to shed the rain, and the brickwork and the arches, and you will see the three arches in the middle under the curve of the brick. So these are all just images. Not that I'm going to test anybody on their memory, but to cycle through it, the Bengal arch and the three entrance pillars, the Jarokas from Rajasthan, which is the west of the country, Bishnupur is in the east of the country. You see the Ajanta caves once again in the western parts of the country and very dear to the Buddhists. The stupa, the beautiful examples of cathedrals and domes and their details and their finials from Western architecture, the design and detail of the ribs, the beautiful temple gopurams and the intricate columns and beam arrangements of the temples in South India, the Garbha Mandira and the rules that Swamiji decided to move away from of strictly traditional temple architecture, finally Islamic architecture of the mosques. So with this, give me a moment as I cycle back through a few images and quickly get you to the topic of the day, which is Belur Math. Swamiji also visited a lot of great architecture in the West. This is the 1893, the home of the World's Fair in 1893, and of course the Art Institute of Chicago. Once again, three arches represented in a different way with a different format. Very interesting aspect of architecture. The entrances are always very celebrated. In India, the concept of Dikpalakas, the energy that protects the different directions. There are energies in every direction. There are deities for every direction. This is represented in a way that the entrances are always celebrated. You can see here a beautiful stone wall and an entrance element off to the side of the building. And you will now see how beautifully, this is once again just an image of the World's Fair. It is, I think, interesting that Swamiji would have perhaps noticed the hundreds and thousands of people that were drawn to the World's Fair. And every country was represented by its architecture. The Japanese pavilion, the various European powers in their pavilions, and the power of architecture to have a meaning in people's lives was something that would obviously have made a mark. Swamiji at the World's Fair. Reims Cathedral, once again, spires, the heavy importance to the arrival, but an integrated chapel. With that, I'd like to move to Belur Mutt. It is interesting Belur Mutt itself calls the Belur Mutt as the heart of the Ramakrishna movement. It is interesting that so much attention is placed to a piece of architecture. It is a very, I think, a very rare example of a spiritual soul who took personal interest in the development of the design of a temple, of a manifestation of the words of his master and of his own guiding principles of the harmony of all religions. We looked earlier at the idea of assimilation, not destruction. Swami's words. Swami chose to leave behind a temple that will have meaning for ages to come. It's a very dear temple to a lot of people. It is by the grace of the Divine Mother that one gets a chance to even visit this great temple. We'll now spend a few minutes looking at the architecture of the temple itself. You would notice here that Swami created something very similar to some of the cathedral examples that you noticed. There is a grand entrance, there is the hall, and the celebration of the form above the seat of Sri Ramakrishna. You begin to start noticing the Islamic arches at the entrance, the South Indian architecture represented in the treatment around the windows. If you look to the top, you start noticing the jarokas. If you start looking at the geometry of the domes, you start seeing the geometry of some of the domes from eastern India, northern India. The domes themselves are borrowed from Islamic architecture, but their geometry is tweaked. That's a very interesting aspect of what Swamiji did. So, this is a conversation really. There are a lot of people that hold their temples and their mosques and their churches very dear to them. But it's actually very difficult to attract people of another religion into the houses of religion of something that people feel does not belong to you. So, Swamiji, in creating the architecture for Belur Mutt, made it so that he borrowed aspects and elements from different architectures, but this temple really cannot be classified or categorized as a style. And I think that's a very important aspect of somebody coming to the temple and looking for symbolism. It's very natural. You look for symbolism and people only see what they want to see. So I'm sure there are people that feel very welcome because they look at the Buddhist symbolism in it, people that are looking at the Islamic symbolism in it, people that quietly, in a nuanced fashion, see the similarity to a church. It begins to have very simple, powerful, but subliminal messages that the temple can send out. And that is the greatness of architecture. It is very visual, and when you start seeing it, you start seeing the symbolism that Swamiji has begun to incorporate into the temple. This is another view of Belur Mutt. For those who have not been there, you approach the temple and you walk around to the left. This is the view that you will see as you start walking closer to the rear of the temple. The central doorway and the hall, there's beautiful examples of the architecture of the middle of India in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan. You see the architecture of adorning the central doorway on the east, on the temple. So this is a close-up view. the upper portion of the entrance to the temple. So the arches are very beautifully decorated at the base of the arch. It is not as simple as some of the arches from you notice from Italy and Florence. It has been very beautifully decorated with the brackets, establishing an Indian style of the arches. The style of architecture was has extensively been used in India since. You will see it all over India. You will see it in New Delhi. You will see it in places like the Rashtrapati Bhavan. You will notice these beautiful sunshades, the chhajjas, the brackets, and the dome expression around them. This is a view from the other side of the Navaratna, which is the 9 jewels, the main dome at the top, and then you will notice the 4 smaller domes on the 4 corners. And as you come down to the lower level, you see 4 more domes at the lower level. And clearly, this is not a traditional Indian temple by any means. You see temple architecture with gopurams. You see temple architecture with shikharas. You see temple architecture with other examples. But the courage in being able to adopt a dome and place it over Thakur's seat is a grand gesture of welcome to all religions. So this is another view of the temple from the rear. The symbolism is hidden in various ways in the temple. Inside the jalis of the main entrances are carved. Swamiji, if I remember right, when you're walking around the temple, there is Hanuman, there is Sesha, there is so many of the symbols from various religions are carved into the sides of the Belur Math temple. At the entrance Torana to the temple off the main road is a grand arch where Swamiji has represented the symbols of all the great religions of the world that we saw earlier as well. Once again, entrance treatments, borrowing from various parts of India, in architecture from various parts of India. You begin to see the dome. It is not a Gothic dome. It is not an Islamic dome. It is Swamiji's Belur Math dome. It is not Islamic architecture, or it is not a European radius on the arch. It's a classic Belur Math arch. It is Swamiji and the architects that worked with Swami Vivekananda and Swamiji Vivekananda himself, carefully choosing every detail of the dish that was made. It's almost like cooking a great meal. Every ingredient has its place. Nothing can be too much or too little. And so ingredients have been very carefully chosen in the construction of the temple. This is another example of the dome at the main entrance. And it's an extremely beautiful proportion. The dome, the detail of the base of the dome, the flowerets at the base of the dome, it has borrowed from the shikharas of the Hindu temples. So there is so much that Swamiji and Swami Vivekananda have gone to the extents to every aspect of this temple has so many aspects of different religions built into them. It is like constructing a sentence where everybody from every different religion can find a word or a phrase that is meaningful to them. You who are writers can understand how difficult such a task would be. And such has been a task that has been executed at Belur Math. It's a grand temple. This is a view from the side of the temple. If you were to get an opportunity to circumambulate the temple, it's a different view. You can begin to enjoy the proportions of the domes and how this was all created. You can see the balconies, you can see the treatment, the arches. If you remember, I was telling you about the 3 arches from the churches, the temples in Bengal. You begin to start seeing various elements borrowed from around the country. So, very carefully, Swamiji and Swami Vivekananda here have taken this role of creating an architecture that has meaning for people from so many different religions and so many parts of the country and so many parts from around the world, to ensure that there is a structure that is built that has meaning for the ages. So I hope you found that interesting. We can open it up to any questions or jump into any details in greater detail, but thank you so much for the opportunity to present thoughts on the architecture of Belur Math, Swamiji. Swamiji, you, yes, please. The mic's coming.
Thank you. Was there any influence of secular architecture on Belur Math, and especially contemporary trends in architecture?
Could you repeat the question? Secular architecture in Belur Math and
contemporary architectural trends.
Contemporary architecture at the time of the, let's just ask us ourselves that question. Contemporary architecture at the time of the construction of the Math was the 1938, January 14th was when the Belur Math was inaugurated. Construction took years. So construction took 5 or 6 years. So it would have been designed in the 1920s, late 1920s, to allow construction to happen in the 1930s. So we'll take an example of what else from Chicago might have been built around the time of the 1920s. Around 1920s, the Chicago Tribune Tower, right opposite the Wrigley Building, had a grand world competition for design. And fantastic architects from around the world participated. Some people built or described or showed a beautiful steel and glass tower like had never been done in the world before. That was Mies van der Rohe. People were not ready for contemporary architecture then. So the award for the commission of the design went to somebody that said, I'm going to replicate a Gothic architectural tower. So you see, even in Chicago in the 1920s, people were not really ready to let go of their association with Gothic architecture and so on. So that's really why I had that line of assimilation, not destruction. You see a lot of contemporary architecture that is very beautiful and very simple and takes away the symbolism of expressly trying to show religious symbolism. There's a lot of architecture, religious architecture, that does it. Swamiji chose to, at that day and age, assimilate and represent some of the symbolism rather than take it away from the building. So I do feel that it is a refined mix, but it tends to be more traditional than contemporary. It's contemporary in a different way, you know. It was contemporary in that I think there was nothing like that in India before. There was nothing like this. A temple to all religions. Just think about India in the 1930s. It had not yet gained independence from the British. This was not yet an independent country. And here were a group of people that were involved in building a temple that seemed welcoming and felt welcoming to all religions. It's a grand undertaking. So I thought it was very, very forward-looking for its day and time. When you borrow architectural elements from many regions and styles of architecture, it is very easy to make a terrible mishmash. It is very, very easy. Actually, it is all too easy to make something that is a confusing mess. This is a very refined building, so it's done very well. Please.
Thank you for this wonderful presentation. I don't think there's any other architecture like this built again in India. Could you tell why, in your opinion?
Yes, go ahead with, just repeat the question for me once again. Why is there no other architecture since then like this in India, no?
Yes, before we had, before independence, we were able to, well, Swamiji was able to give this to us. Now, it seems that we're moving away from that vision rather than going towards it. In my opinion, is that the reason why we don't have this kind of symbolism where every religion is together and a building built like that? Nowhere in the world.
You know, at one point in time today, I was trying to put the pictures of the world's great religious leaders, and the page started getting populated with people from the East. So at some point I stopped and I said, okay, you know. So where I was going with this was, India has continued to be a country that assimilates, and in my opinion, it is quite under threat, as is every country, from voices that want to create disharmony and discord and not really support harmony. It's rare. This very topic today is rare in terms of what people are trying to do. I was talking to my brother. He had just visited a mosque in southern India and near Rameshwaram, which had so heavily borrowed from the local temple architecture that when he walked in, he said, I was looking at the niches around the temples. I was looking for Hanuman and Durga. And after walking around for a little while, he realized it was a mosque. So there is such work happening. You just don't hear too much about it because it is a few brave people that try to do this. And for every one person who tries to integrate and bring harmony, there's 100 others that are trying to break it apart. The Baha'i temples are a good example. You have one here in Chicago, you have one in Delhi, but it is different. It is not an architecture that tends to wish to symbolize any religion. It has taken the opposite path in a sense, because there are many paths to reach the same goal. So it too attracts people because of the grandeur of the temple. There's a lot of people that enter the temple because of its grandeur. And it too is actually very inspiring in the quietness of the temple. You go inside and you sit and you just enjoy the grandeur of the temple and its quietness. So since then, I think, Swamiji, there is still a lot of competition between religions in India to gain audience of people. So everybody wants to do things that are bigger and better for their own religions, in a sense. I think there are very few people that are trying to bring harmony to religions. It's a very difficult task. So the Ramakrishna Mats themselves are a very good example everywhere of continuing to learn from Belur Math in their own ways, in their own geographies. Swamiji, you have spent years in Belur Math. Are there parts of the temple that you really like? Are there places that you're attached to? What is your relationship to the temple, Swamiji?
You know, as a devotee, we always give complete attention to the statue of the Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, the Murti. And this that you see in front of you, exactly the replica on which Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna's sitting statue is there in the Belur Math. And at the below, it shows the swan. This swan is the symbol of Vishnu, Lord Vishnu. When the infinite first took a form, in the Bhagavata it says, he took this form, the swan. And that is also another symbolism, Paramahamsa, that it is floating on the water, but water cannot wet it. So that is the way human mind, human soul should be. But anyway, your question, our attention is always on the Krishna. Of course, when we, in the evening time, when devotees have left, there is no one in that vast big temple, you feel a different type of vibration over there. And going around the temple, that is also another feeling. Always. And as you were mentioning, and the different doors, that is the protected by the different power. One door is protected by the Hanumana, another is protected by the Garuda. These are all symbolic way. This is really excellent. I will come and give you a thanks over there.
Swamiji.
So almost all of you have visited our Homer Glen ashram, and this Ramu Ramachandran, he is the architect of Homer Glen ashrama. So that he did completely, and I am very thankful to him. So he is a very prominent architect in Chicago city, but very down-to-earth person. So that is very unique in him. Most of the people, they are busy, and you have to have the schedule at least month before, like that. But when I just called him and said that we like to show the Belur Math architecture, and you are the best person to explain, immediately he agreed. He must be having a lot of other engagements, is sidelining all those things. He drove and he came and he gave the talk. I wish more people were here to listen to it. Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, he is the embodiment of God in this modern age, Avatara. And in this Avatara, he wants to show the humanity the unity in diversity. This is the uniqueness of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna. Sri Ramachandra never mentioned about all this. The Avatara of the Lord Vishnu, Sri Ramachandra, he never mentioned about this. Why? It was not necessary. Then next, Sattva, Treta, Dwapar, Lord Vishnu, Bhagavan Krishna, all are from Vishnu, from Krishna, he mentioned about different paths of Hinduism. Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, that we find in the Bhagavad Gita. And he is mentioning about some of the philosophical ideas that was cropping up slowly, like the Samkas and others. So that was another time. But there is no other religions, like the Semitic religions that we find now. They may be there in a very or the way it was not known to the world. But when Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna came in 1836, it was the modern age. So obviously by that time in different parts of the world and different type of religions that developed. And it was the duty of the avatara, the God, to show that all paths are leading to the same goal. In his own life, he practiced Islam there itself, in the Hindu temple, Kali temple at Dakshineshwar. And the place where he practiced Islam, it is still there, in the temple premises. So that is the uniqueness. We cannot imagine in that orthodox society, there he practiced. And not only that, he realized that Jesus, he saw the Jesus. Jesus came out and merged in his person. He used to visit different other religious groups to listen to them. Each and every path of the Tantra and also the Vaishnavism, he practiced. The Hinduism having so many different paths like the Vaishnavism, the Tantra and Vedanta, he practiced. And then he said, all paths are leading to the same goal. So obviously when Swami Vivekananda, his disciple, the chosen apostle, the whom he trained that way, he came over here in Chicago in 1892-93. When he gave the talk, he gave the message of unity in diversity. Friends, many of you have read the Gospel of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna. In one of the places, the one person was showing a photograph. Photo means the hand-drawn. And one of the devotee, after listening to Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, he drew a picture. And in that picture, Nandalal Bose, in their house it was hanging, the different religions, the representatives are standing, and center was Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna. So someone pointed him out, and he showed, here in this picture, you are also there. The Sri Ramakrishna told, this is the path of the modern age. Unity in diversity. So that is really, really unique. Many other philosophy, many other religions, they are now started thinking about it. So we cannot simply close our door and say, our paths are the best and you go to hell. No, that is over. So you will wonder in I think the last year, so I went over there to the Riyadh, the capital of Saudi Arabia, and that is the heartland of the Islam. After 1,500 years, in Riyadh, they organized all religious meet. Can you imagine? The doors and windows are opening. Those who can see, they can see. The things are completely changing. That narrowness is going away. Of course, the science has helped humanity to understand each other. Now we are reaching to each other in any corner of the world because of the science. And because the science is helping, immediately the human minds are coming closer, understanding each other. And that is the reason here we, the followers of Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, have started, though it was previously a church, and Methodist church, they used to worship over here for the Jesus. And afterwards, for some reason, they sold that, they put it in the market, and we came, we purchased, and very dignified way, they took the cross that they kept over here, they took away that. I was sitting over there and observing. They were praying and they sang, and gracefully, slowly they, in a procession, took away that one. We took it. And then whom we blessed? One who is the embodiment of all religions. So here is Bhagavan Sri Ramakrishna, not to criticize anyone, but to say, be sincere in your own path and continue in your own journey. Only thing, don't hate others. The symbol that is there outside, it says the same thing. And the slogan that you see over here, and that is also, as many faiths, so many paths. So we have to understand each other. And this particular, every Saturday 4 to 5, under love, know and love, under that, the know and love, we are inviting different type of people and to speak on different type of subjects on their own religion, on own culture. And today, Mr. Ramu Ramachandran, he given beautiful the descriptions of the structure, but that also talks about different faiths, different religion, different culture. Swami Vivekananda dreamed that that should be the idea. People should come, they will see, and they will feel this is my own. And the Bengalis are coming and seeing, oh, this is just like our temple, our building. And the Rajasthanis are coming, the Christians are coming, Muslims are coming, Buddhists are coming, everyone will find there. And if you go close to the door of the Belur Math, there is a scroll in both the side. Those two scrolls are the symbols of the Zoroastrians. The Jewish people, they say that scroll, and that is the symbol is there. And the two elephants, that is also the symbol of the Buddhist. Because the Buddha was born when his mother dreamed that the white elephants are coming to her. So that is the symbol of the Lord Buddha. So Buddhism is also there. And as he mentioned, the moment you enter into the main hall, another type of feeling. They entered into a church. Then you go, you see that, as he correctly mentioned, the traditional Hindus, they keep the actual sanctum sanctorium separate than the Nath Mandira, the cultural hall. The cultural hall, and it is separate. If you go to Bengal and visit Kali Ghat temple, you will find they are very close, but they are separate. The main temple and the cultural hall are separate. If you go to Dakshineshwar, you will find they are separate. In between, the hollow is there, deep is there, you can pass through that. But in Belur Math, it is together. And when the sun is rising, if you notice, the sunlight will cross in such a way as if a cross, you can see the cross of sunlight in the Belur Math there. There is a beautiful way, and some closed minds, narrow minds may criticize, but their days are over. So they cannot criticize anymore, even if it doesn't matter anyway. This is the unity in diversity. We are not going to break anyone, and I am also not going to merge with anyone. I will continue in my own journey, and I will help you to continue in your own journey. And you know that particular piece of land was purchased with the help of two ladies, the disciples of Swami Vivekananda from America. But Indian people that time, they were not having money, they were poor. And two American ladies, they gave that money. American disciples, they helped us to purchase that plot of land and to construct the temple. I have forgotten to bring that picture. Maybe someday I will show you those two ladies wearing the shadi like the Indian lady of the way, and they are sitting on the steps of the Belur Math temple. So these two ladies, they gave the money. So this way, all people from all over, they are helping, because this is the path of the modern age. Thank you, friends. Thank you for coming over here. And I pray to God, let our mind be broad enough to understand the many ways of God. Please repeat after me 3 times the Shanti. Om Shanti. 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 Hari Om. Thank you, Ramu, and thank you, devotees, for coming.